It's Mathel here once again, and today I'm going to be showing you pretty much every endgame fight and a few maps and all that with the Starforge Raider Cycloner, because at this point the character's pretty much finished. He only got a few days playtime because we just leveled so damn fast with it. The character hit about 91, almost 92, and that took about 21 hours, which for me is, about 4 stream days. So we didn't really get to play too much of it because I don't particularly like mapping too much in the current system past 91 or 92. It just gets a little too slow, and I don't have too many goals beyond that after we kill the current endgame, which is, most endgame bosses, and then Guardians, Shaper, Atziri as well. So the character has done pretty much everything, has exceeded expectations in its sort of speed, damage, and feel departments, and it's been really quite decent on limited currency from, of course, the Starforge itself. Everything else has been pretty standard, fairly, unexpensive, and just a nice sort of build overall to compete with a Namahu Raider Cyclone. Just a different feel since we're fizz rather than fire, and using some poison scaling in the long run to get our damage going. The character I think ends up being a bit tankier than Namahu's and a bit better on the DPS as well as a bit faster. And this here I'm showing you is an Uber Atziri run. We are still on a 5-link. 2 5-links that is, and not using anything too crazy, though in the future I did definitely buy a Sins Rebirth to test it out because it's a huge gain for the build. It's almost as good as, another link. So, Sins Rebirth goes a long way, but we did do Uber Atziri completely clean. This is the first attempt with 5 links without anything too insane, and the damage was still really good. Our survivability was great. We have about 70% evasion, 40% dodge, Val Pact, good leech, really good movement speed, and with Val Grace up, something like 70 dodge instead. Right there I almost died because I don't actually have a bleed flask that gives immunity for this fight. I just have a bleed clearance flask, which is my life flask, so it gets you into a bit of trouble. And you can see that the damage isn't too impressive when we don't have all of our flasks up, as well as our War Chief Totem. So War Chief Totem is a good chunk of our damage for single target. He hits pretty damn hard. It's something like 200,000 DPS or whatever, fully buffed. So having him down is a pretty big gain to our DPS as well. But otherwise, once everything's rolling, the damage is pretty damn good, you can see. That's with Conk Effect on Cyclone. The issue I'd say for the build is basically that Cyclone AoE got nerfed pretty recently, so it doesn't feel anywhere near as good as it used to, though it is still pretty damn fun and playable. It's just not really, what it once was. You can't go for full screen clears. You can't, just do one loop throughout most maps without changing direction. You really do have to change direction quite often, pick up stragglers, all that sort of shit. But, we tried to fix that with really fast movement speed and certainly got quite a long way. Now, I'd say if you're doing the build again from scratch and you don't have a Starforge or you're really missing some damage, you don't have to go Queen of the Forest. I end up hitting more attack speed or more movement speed than I really needed or wanted, and damage, could have been better. So you can see here, this is our first attempt at Phoenix. Damage is pretty insane, but the movement speed, doesn't really do too much at this sort of level of gameplay. It's mostly just for clearing really fast. It's mostly for doing really fast maps. But, you drop a Queen of the Forest, you put in a Cherubims, for example, or a Belly the Beast, and we do become a lot tankier or a lot more damage oriented. So Queen of the Forest doesn't necessarily have to be put into the build. You feel like you'd rather a bit more defense or a bit more offense, because it's mostly there for the feels good of the Cyclone. And like I said, in the long run, I end up getting more movement speed than I really thought I needed. Though if you want to do the same setup that I do here in the long run, that is drop my Quicksilver for a Sins Rebirth, so I can have all of those nice flasks still, then you probably still want to keep Queen of the Forest in. Now, something that was pretty damn surprising was this here Hydra kill. Hydra's immune to poison. We are, you know, a decent bit poison in the long term for the endgame bosses, but she died immensely fast. Probably the fastest I've ever killed Hydra on for a poison-based character, and it was really smooth. You know, you have good spell dodge, you have really good movement speed, and it's just crazy how much damage it was actually doing without poison, because, you know, we still hit really hard for Fizz, still hit pretty damn hard for Chaos, so poison isn't, you know, the be-all, end-all for the build, and I'm not even using Wither Totem for scaling, because I think War Chief is more damage in my setup than a Wither Totem would otherwise be, because we are so not strictly reliant on poison. Chimera here, pretty damn smooth as well. You know, there's really not much to mention or show here. Chimera just, you know, spin on top of him, dodge a few of his attacks if you feel like you need to. Try and keep Fortify up during smoke phase. Adds pretty straightforward too. I don't think there's even a right way to fight this. You can pop flasks against the ads, you can pop flasks against Chimera. It was all pretty straightforward. It was all fairly doable and you know, uneventful, I'd say. Just like all of the Guardians, basically. The only real trouble we had was when we got to Shaper, and that's because we're a fucking melee build and there's so much to do, but I'll go over that when we get there in a few minutes. You can see here, smoke phase basically never get hit with the level of evasion dodge we have. It's pretty damn amazing. But to keep in mind, he's also poison immune, just like Hydra, and the damage here, pretty adequate. I'm not even flasking a lot of the time. I'm doing damage to him, and it, you know, usually takes a quick rotation or two. If you flask, then he should definitely die within those flask ranges. This Minotaur here wasn't too bad, but I was facing an exile, and I think there was a bad mod on there as well. But you know, also messed up just a little. Otherwise, yeah, Minotaur dies pretty quickly. Throw on your trap. Drop your totem, try and make sure it survives, drop your flasks or pop your flasks, and it should be straightforward. I did get sniped by a rock here because, like I said, there was damage mods on this map and they hurt pretty bad. Dead. So lastly, it's just Shaper, and Shaper was actually kind of a challenge for this fight. For this character, I should say. Like you can see here, our damage was pretty good, and survivability is pretty decent as well. The problem really comes into play when we get to phase 3, and there's just so much shit going on, and me being a really melee-based character, like, you know, Conk Effect Cyclone Raider is really tiny, and you also have to spin on him sort of specifically, you know, directly on top of him with avoiding a whole bunch of things because of the way Cyclone is. You have to spin back and forth, and our mana kind of sucks. All in all, it just makes for a really hectic phase 3, and you may be able to see a bit of that. Definitely had a fairly tough time on phase 3 with Shaper with this sort of play style, though phase 1 and 2 extremely smooth, completely uneventful, just like most other bosses in the game. When we get to phase 3, there's just so much going on right here. So the balls spawn pretty damn quickly, and then there's the ad, you know, his mirror ad coming out, and all in all, you just barely ever get any DPS time on him when you actually want it, because the balls you constantly have to try and place in good positions as a melee while doing no fucking damage whatsoever. If he sits on top of a ball that you've placed badly, then you can't do any damage. If he's doing this shit, you know, you can usually get some damage in, but all in all, it can go really south really fast, though this one wasn't a bad attempt. So there isn't really too much left to mention for the build. I won't do a full guide or anything, because the previous video and just looking at my gear and passives is more or less enough to get this character going if you want to copy it. It's rather straightforward. We hit level 91, with Grace and Blasphemy Vulnerability up, currently sitting at 20,000 evasion, popping all the flasks, we're at 39 evasion, 39,000, so it's almost 100% movement speed from Queen of the Forest, and completely buffed up, we're looking at 171% movement speed without Val Haste or the Frenzy charges, because they give us a bit of evasion as well through things like this guy over here. In the end, yeah, it's something like 45,000 evasion. Now, one thing I will mention is your end game setup. Lion's Roar can be a bit uncomfortable at times if you're not killing things immediately, which we usually are. If you can get your hands on Sin's Rebirth, your end game leveling or, you know, mapping setup would be replacing Sin's Rebirth over Lion's Roar, and then when you really want the big single targets, get rid of Quicksilver, and that's your 4 flask setup for success. Sin's Rebirths are really expensive, so I understand if you can't get one, but it's a big damage gain, as, you know, it's a huge amount of chaos. So, you know, it's worth it if you can get it, but if you can't, it's not going to mean the end of the world. You would just survive off of things like Lion's Roar and whatever else you want. And like I said, you can get a Cherubim's instead of this if you really want. Now, I did mention Duresa's Salute +2 weapon range. It felt pretty damn mandatory. Because, well, AoE was shit without it. We had +1 Frenzy on that, +1 Frenzy on the boots. You can use whatever boots you want, Dark Ray Vectors, but I really wanted the life and the spell dodge from Atziri Step, so that's what I did. You are free to do whatever else you want. Everything else, fairly straightforward. I don't think there's too much else to mention. All of my mana leech comes from the ring, and it's kind of uncomfortable for mana with Cyclone, even on a 5-link. If I was going a 6-link, I would 100% have to get some mana gain on hit on a jewel somewhere. So keep your eyes out for jewels with mana gain on hit and some decent stats, because it goes a long way to helping your mana out. Otherwise, just some area damage, some fizz. That's basically what you're looking for, and I don't think there's too much else to mention besides the fact that I went for Avatar of Veil because of everything besides the LE damage on that. Movement speed, status ailments, it's all really good stuff. Feel free to grab Avatar of the Chase if you're only mapping and you don't really care about bosses and single target, because then, you know, this is probably going to get you faster and better clear. Otherwise, I think this is a better all-around package for everything in total. That's all I've got to say about this character, guys. If you can't get a Starforge, I don't know if it's worth playing. Your leveling goes from Edge of Madness into a Terminus Est, maybe some other sword, but this was more or less built around Starforge because it's fairly cheap and accessible at the moment. There's a lot of them out there. So if you want to play something like this, here it is. If you don't, more power to you. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and see you next time.